What was the idea at the beginning? It was to talk about George Sand and Chopin.
There is a really important third figure in it, who's Solange, who was her daughter. And it's this triangle that I'm really intrigued by.
So, Cathy, I am so happy to have you here and to have this opportunity to talk about your career, about your works, and about this exciting creation that you will do for us.
Me too. Very excited to be here.
You are one of the choreographers. When I talk with, you propose me to do a new ballet for us. Most of the choreographers always want to do an existing work with the company. So do you have a reason for that?
I just love creating, and you never know. I mean, I hope you'll invite me back more than once, but if you have an opportunity to work with these dancers, I want to create with them. That's the way that I find the closest relationship with the dancers, is by making something new and inspiring one another. So let's jump in the deep end and try.
And you work with a lot of different companies. Do you expect something special for the Paris Opera ballet dancer?
You know, I'm not really sure what to expect. Obviously, a very high level of technique. I think it's a company that will have really strong dramatic instincts as well. But I don't know the company intimately. And so I'm quite ready to be surprised. And I was just here a few months ago to do some initial workshops. And I was really happy with the way that, working with just a few people in the studio, there was already a dialogue. And that's really important to me. So I'm hoping that that's what I'll find, is a collaboration.
I think that's coming for the first time. And working with our dancers, that will be challenging for them also, because that will be the same thing. They will discover you. They don't know, really, they never worked with you. For me, I will say it's interesting to have you, because you often, or most of the time, you work with narrative ballets. When I arrived, the head of dance in Paris Opera 3 years ago, I started looking for choreographers who work with classical vocabulary, but in a contemporary form, you know, because in this house, Marius Petipa, all the 350 years of history, we are always thinking about tradition and creation at the same time, and it's not easy to find choreographers who want to work with this classical vocabulary in a way which touch the audience today. So seeing your works, first in social media, after when I come to Zurich to see Clara, I discovered that you really like to tell stories and to give like a new, we say that, a new nouveau regard, a new perspective of these old narratives. When you start with a project, what is the idea at the beginning? Is a story?
Usually it's a story. I recently made a piece for the Royal Ballet that actually started with the music, and from there I drew out the story. But more often than not, it could be a novel or a play, or sometimes a biography. Sometimes it's not even the whole life, the whole biography of someone, but perhaps it's something about a particular character, whether it's a fictional character or a real life character, that makes me feel like they're going to lead my work. There's something about them that intrigues me and draws me in. And then I'm looking at the relationships that come from that person. And over the years, I've gotten much braver about cutting out the things that I'm not inspired by, and really just
take the essence,
focusing on the seed that has drawn me in. And especially when it's a piece that is not a full length, you have only a very little time, let's say 30, maybe 40 minutes. So you don't need a large story.
And it's not difficult to make these choices?
Yeah.
Let's say take that out?
Well, sometimes. I'm quite radical with it sometimes. And sometimes I feel a little guilty, you know, that, for example, I made a ballet called The Cellist, which was about Jacqueline Dupre. And she had actually 2 siblings. But for the story I was trying to tell, it was more helpful if she had 1 sister. And so I really reduced that. And actually that's going to happen in the ballet that I'm making with you as well. I think sometimes it's not really that you're telling their life. We can never tell someone's life completely, but we're taking a view on something about it. And so I really enjoy fictionalized biographies, and maybe reading those over the years, I realized that people take great liberties, and it's okay. I see you in one way, someone else will see you in a different way, and that's okay. That's part of life.
How do you work on the process? I think that collaborations are important for you. You start alone thinking about a project, and after you share it with people around you, or you choose first the dramaturg, the musician, the composer, the set designer, and you work together?
There's one particular collaborator that I worked with for around just under 25 years, I think, by now. He's called Edward Kemp, and he is a dramaturg, a writer, a librettist. I met him a very long time ago when I was living in London, and I knew I wanted to make narrative pieces, and I wanted a partner to do that with. And I was sat in a canteen in a rehearsal space one day, and I found myself in conversation with the theatre and opera director, Cathy Mitchell. And we got chatting, and I said, could she recommend a writer who didn't need their words on stage? And she recommended Edward Kemp, and she put us in touch very kindly. And we've been working together ever since. And so usually I'll have an idea. Sometimes he brings ideas to the table, but usually it's me, and I'll say, what do you think? And we begin. And our initial conversations are almost like going to the therapist. I'll sort of sit back and he'll ask me, what's in your mind? What do you already see? And I'll start describing things in no particular order. And quite soon we're trying to get to the way in. So what is the perspective on this piece? What's the crux of the story? Why this story? That's a hard one, actually. If I start asking why this story too early on, I block myself. So really it's a question of bringing out the things that I already know. In the early days, we used to write everything on big pieces of paper all over the floor and start to rearrange them and so on. But nowadays we do more on Zoom. But we start to find slowly what I call the scenario, which is like a script. And then as we're in that process, we're of course thinking about the music. And sometimes the music comes along with the idea. So I've got a sort of series of ballets that I've made, the cellist being one, or Clara that you mentioned, which is about Clara Schumann and Robert Schumann and Brahms. I just made a piece to Benjamin Britten's violin concerto. Sometimes I'm drawn to the music and the life of a composer. And so it becomes one, That will be the case in the piece that we're going to make together as well.
So maybe we can talk about the piece, about this
Only
subject.
A little bit so far.
Yeah. We need to keep some secrets for the performance, for sure. What was the idea at the beginning? It was to talk about George Sand and Chopin, or what's, because we're still working, would you share with us some information? And I know that it was like evolutive, like you were like working in the dramaturgy and with small changes.
Yeah, it's
what
still,
point you are today?
Evolving. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, the point today, I think I'm trying to nudge it more towards George Sand than George and Chopin. And there is a really important third figure in it, who's Solange, who was her daughter. And it's this triangle that I'm really intrigued by. And it's partly, I love trios. I love pas de trois. I mean, I love pas de deux as well. But there's something about a triangular relationship. The tensions are so rigorous. You have these lines and different combinations. It's partly that you have more options for different pas de deux within a story and different relationships and perspectives. But also a trio is just such an interesting thing to choreograph. It's one step more than a pas de deux, but not yet a group. And there was something about the relationship of Georges and Chopin, the way it begins, the way it ends. Well, I suppose her personality, her relationship with her mother, her feelings as a daughter, and then her relationship with her daughter. I was just finding so many points that were drawing me into this particular story. So this is the central shape of the work. And the more that we work on the scenario, we're still in that process, the more actually it is centered on Georges rather than a love affair between her and Chopin. Of course, Chopin provides the soundtrack for much of it and is the central. Well, I mean, if you look, he's there, I suppose, for George and Chopin. On the other hand, she's there. So you can't. That's the wonderful thing about a triangle, that each one is the center for the other two.
And how about the corps de ballet, working around them?
I usually work from the inside out. So I need to find
Start with them.
the central figures and relationships, and then what do I need to tell? How can I use the corps de ballet and the larger group of people to amplify the story of those central figures? Not that the corps de ballet are not important, and I actually, jumping to the bows, I don't know, you probably have a great tradition of how one takes a curtain call here in Paris, but I will ask if I can do a scatter bow. I always finish with the first bow is everybody over the stage rather than the center, the main part on their own, because for me, once we get to the end, it's actually all of the people on stage make the work. It's not just the central people, but in the way I conceive the piece, it has to start from that point. The society, the group, the people around her in her life will be represented by the corps de ballet, but also her writing. And that's something that intrigues me always, is how do we express an artist on stage? How can we embody not just their daily life or who they fell in love with or who was born and who died or those things, but how can we express what they created and their inner thoughts and ideas? And so that's something that I want to try. At the moment, that's part of the idea that I'm conceiving, is how can I work with other dancers, almost as shadow figures, to express her writing.
Right, and how about the music? There will be some Chopin music. Philippe Fenet will be the composer to arrange all these things. We will have some live music, recording music together.
So you asked about collaborators. So Philippe Fenet is someone I've worked with several times before, and he's an amazing composer and arranger. We worked together, for example, on my ballet of Jane Eyre, on The Cellist, on Clara, several others that I'm now forgetting. Sometimes he creates full-length original scores. I made a ballet on Queen Victoria, which is, funnily enough, the same time period as Georges Sand, and he created the whole score for that. But other times there's obviously pieces of music that part of the fabric of the story, so it would be ridiculous not to weave them into the score. And that's obviously the case here. So it will be with some Chopin, but it won't be pure Chopin all the way through. That's exciting, to play with how we can bring in little quotations and echoes. Like you said, we're looking at having live music performed with the piano, obviously, and probably a little chamber ensemble, but also to use an electronic level. And maybe that will help us to convey this sense of a double reality, the reality of her life, but also the level of her creative life, the sort of plane of her creative life.
And how about the costumes and sets? That will be the same with like traditional and new vision?
Yes, absolutely. So Patrick Kinmouth will do both set and costumes. And he's, again, someone that I've worked with many times before. And we understand this. It's sort of finding references from the period, enough on stage to anchor us at moments in reality or in a real world, let's say, but at the same time giving us scope for the imagination, space for abstraction. And that's what we're working on at the moment.
Right, and I have a question about the casting and about the way that you work with dancers. When you have two different casts and they are doing it in a different way, you work separately with them all together, and the question is more that everyone is doing exactly the same thing, or you will adapt to each one of them?
I think definitely adapt. It's always a balance. Once I made a ballet that had one actress in it, and she was speaking. And we had two casts because you never know what happens. and also, you know, sometimes an actress can't perform two performances, so you need an understudy. And I remember the understudy coming in, and she was so confused because she could see the different casts of the dancers in the studio, you know, that we might have been doing a pas de deux and there'd be probably 3 couples around the room. She said, but they're all copying each other. And I said, yes. And it was interesting talking to the actors because they said if you steal something from your understudy or vice versa, that's not a good thing to do in that profession or as an actress. But I love about dancers that we share ideas, and sometimes we'll have a different interpretation, and nothing reads the same because we're all different human beings. So you have to test the temperature on each person and find the detail for each individual. But at the same time, if one person does it like this and it really works, then I will ask the other people, that hand was great, can we do it all like that? And so it's a balance. When I'm creating, I really try to watch all of the casts in the room. Sometimes, of course, you narrow in, but if I get a little bit stuck here, my eye is open here as well. And really involving all the different casts, I think, is important in the creation. So it's a bit of both.
Great. I think that we need to work a little bit on the planning to find time for you, because that's always complicated in Paris Opera. We have like less than 1 month to do a piece. That will be a 45 minute ballet. So we need to work together to find some extra time, but I think that our dancers will be really involved in this, and you will see tonight at the performance that in 1 month we can do a lot of things here. I am selling you our planning, our short planning. No, we're still working to find time. I think it's important if we can do this thing, like to have 1 week or 2 weeks, long time before, like this, we'll have time like to think about it and to come back the second time with not new ideas, but with mature ideas.
I often work in these blocks. And
You always used to work like this?
not always, but often it works out like that. And I enjoy it. As long as there's enough time at the end to really run it in, because I've got this script or the scenarios, so it's not that I don't know where the piece is going. I have a map, and somehow it gives you enough time to digest, also for the dancers.
And sometimes your map change during the rehearsals, or you do this work before and it's clear for you?
In a
Depends on what's
narrative work,
happening in the studio?
Yeah, in a narrative work, the map usually stays quite accurate. It was actually, that was lovely about the piece for the Royal Ballet just now, because I had the music and I didn't tell anyone any story that was in my head. Well, I shared some ideas with the dancers, but in that case, it did evolve actually in the studio. But in the case of a narrative, you know the story points that you need to cover. I don't go into the studio with any movement ideas. The characters can evolve along the way, but the structure of the piece tends to stay fairly as planned.